Jared Thomas, thank you so much for speaking with Love Oswaya today about your contribution to Hometown Haunts. The first question I have for you is the question we're asking every author, which is, to you as an author, and I guess as a person, what is at the core of horror and what is at the core of writing horror?
It's a really interesting question. I think for me, like at the core of horror is actually, it's looking at the bounds of respect. And for me, horror often gets me to think about the afterlife and also our actions in the present. So, there's that whole, I guess, within a Judeo-Christian sense, there's the notion of heaven and hell and, acts, sinful acts, etc. And the culture that I'm from as a Nukuna person and the cultural lens that I write Seek and Destroy through, we have those understandings of heaven and hell as well. So for me, horror, in part, it's about scaring the hell out of people. But yeah, I think it's looking at the fragility of our life and yeah, the importance of particular boundaries. And I guess, we get so scared when we engage with horror, whether it be like a film or a story. And I guess it reminds us of what it means to actually be safe. Because when we're watching horror or when we're listening to horror, we actually want to return to that point of safety. But momentarily we're terrified. So for me, it's about, what are those points of personal, kind of communal, social safety? And I guess it just reminds us of those things, reinforces the needs for safety.
I think that's a really good point. You watch horror to be scared and then to feel safe in the comfort of your own home. But it's also what is scary. So I think you've got a really interesting point there, Jared. And I think picking up on that, just asking more specifically about your story, I think you did something really interesting, which was you tapped into the particular horror in a way that I think, well, it's universal, the idea of, and I don't feel like it's a particularly big spoiler to say, disturbing a gravesite and the horror that comes with not treating with respect of the resting place of a person or a group of people, and why that's, and then from there the story develops layers of different kinds of horror associated with that. And I was wondering if you'd be able to elaborate a little bit on, how you tease that out and what you were looking to craft the story around in writing it.
Yeah, I guess, well, I've never been asked or attempted to write horror before, really. And, as a teenager, I didn't really, and as an adult, I don't watch a whole lot of horror. Or, I've not read a whole lot of horror. And I think in part because I spend large stretches of time out bush by myself. So it's probably not a good thing to have all these kind of visuals stuck in my head. But yeah, I guess writing a horror, I thought about like who watches horror, engages with it. And for me, it was a particular type of fella when I was growing up. And it was mostly, non-Aboriginal people that I grew up with who were listening to metal during the 90s. And I grew up in a very industrial town. And a lot of the people that I grew up with, those non-Aboriginal blokes and Aboriginal alike, work in, kind of more industry, trades, oil and gas, those types of professions. So I thought if I'm going to write if I'm going to write a horror story, and how am I going to kind of relate it to those types of people? Yeah, so, you know, I set it with a young non-Aboriginal bloke as the main character, Bradley, and yeah, but Bradley is kind of, he's not oblivious to the importance of the gravesite that's being disrupted. But a lot of people around him, those that are his senior, his superior, they are. And so I guess I was making a comment on the fact that a lot of people don't have an understanding or haven't cared to ask since, I guess, the earliest points of contact, what are our sacred spaces? And there's an awareness within Australian context of the sacred spaces of mainstream Australia. And, you know, those places are kind of pretty obvious, like grave sites, cemeteries that are marked, cathedrals, sometimes at sporting arenas, the MCG, Adelaide Oval, the Opera House, so arts and cultural sites. But I guess more broadly, Aboriginal sacred places aren't understood. So our cathedrals, they're in the land. They're not visible to a lot of people. Similarly with our grave sites, you know, only those that know can tell marked sites. So yeah, I think that's something that I really wanted to communicate, that consideration around how much Aboriginal people have to endure. I mean, you're in Melbourne, Alice, and, you know, just before COVID, I traveled to Melbourne, and there's those sacred trees on the highway where, you know, through development, they're having to interfere with them to make a trip along that highway just a couple of minutes shorter or something like this. So there's like an economic imperative. And I guess that's what I'm showing in Seek and Destroy, that there's this economic imperative for disregarding Aboriginal principles of respect.
And I think what you did really, really well with Seek and Destroy was your main character, and I'm so bad with names, Jared, and I know you just said his name.
What, Bradley?
Thank you, Bradley.
There you go.
What you do really well is you tease out his economic hardship and his incentives for, or why his participation in something that he fundamentally doesn't feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I wouldn't say with Bradley like he has economic hardship so much.
True.
Like,
His economic incentive.
Yeah, he you know, like he is, yeah, but he is a young person that's trying to find employment, you know, and he's bored shitless during this like crazy hot summer, you know, and he's just like an apprentice in a job that, you know, he doesn't want to be with. So I guess there is a bit of an economic incentive, but one of the Aboriginal characters really emphasizes the need for economic participation, right? So that whole title, Seek and Destroy, like Seek and Destroy is a Metallica song off of the album Kill 'Em All, right? And but it's almost like that might be kind of default, you know, seeking resources, destroying resources, often destroying communities. You know, yet it's always kind of presented as a positive. And I guess, and look, sometimes some of that industry can be really positive, but oftentimes for Aboriginal people, it's not. And so this story, I guess, in part, is about, you know, hoping that people kind of gain insight into some of the considerations of Aboriginal people when, you know, development occurs.